Bienvenido a mi presentación sobre el Moodle plugin StudentQuiz. Me llamo Frank Koch, soy de la University of Applied Sciences Rapperswil y mi castellano es tan mal que es mejor para todos si voy a seguir en inglés. I have two reasons to talk to you. One is student and the other is quiz. Student because Moodle content is rather teacher-driven, and in Rapperswil we wanted to create something that motivates students to create Moodle content by themselves. And quiz because quizzing is fun, students like it, quizzes give instant feedback. Now I don't know here in Spain, but in Switzerland students give very high importance to exams. And they very often ask for old exam questions. They want self-assessments, they want quizzes in order to prepare themselves for exams. Why? It's very efficient to learn by questions. If you have a good set of questions, it gives you some indications about the scope and also the depth of the topic being asked. And questions are also highly interactive. You get feedback, you get correctness back from those questions. And that's actually great. But the problem is, who creates all those questions? And that's exactly the point where StudentQuiz comes in. Instead of the teacher doing all the work, StudentQuiz takes advantage of larger student groups and delegates this duty or this creative job to the students, and they can create and share these questions. And that's one advantage of StudentQuiz, and I call this advantage here cooperation. Tú, el profesor, no estás solo. But that's not the only advantage, there are many more. Another one is constructivism. If you answer a question, that's already quite good. But if you create a question, that's so much better. Instead of just passively receiving knowledge from your environment, you become active part of the knowledge creation. Then collaboration, the questions created, they become shared in the classroom community. And students can rate these questions, they can comment questions, so that you get something like a collective intelligence, a crowd intelligence we call it nowadays, where students in the group the group becomes smarter than an individual student. And another advantage, inspiration. Students' creativity often rocks, and I was so often inspired by the good quality of student question. And I took some of these questions to work on them later on. Now, these are the advantages that you can realize, and now it's a question, how did we put them into StudentQuiz? And this is a long list of properties that StudentQuiz claims. The first one, StudentQuiz makes Moodle content student-driven. Moodle has the slogan empowering educators, and here we have a little bit of empowering students. Then the students, they can create their own question pools, and when they work through the quizzes, they can then rate and comment these questions. And while they do so, while they work through the quizzes, StudentQuiz is collecting usage data. We keep track of how difficult a question is, how a question was rated by the community. We also keep track of individual students. So what question did a student have difficulty with, or how did he like a particular question, or which question he hasn't yet answered. And we give some indications for this. So this is actually the next point, the personal learning assistance. A student probably likes the idea of having a crowd-based system, but a student will also be very concerned about his or her own performance, and that's why we have indication how a student compares to his peer group. I will show you this on some screenshots. There's also good news for the teacher. The questions that become created, they are just ordinary Moodle questions, like what you find in Moodle quizzes. So you can recycle those questions and use them maybe in your exam. And Well, last not least, it was created at my university and it's multilingual. Thank you very much to Laia. She was so kind and also translated it to Catalan. There's also Catalan language pack, and of course Castellano we also have. Good. Now let me just introduce you to the most important screenshots. When you create a new student quiz activity, that's probably an important slide here, the advanced settings. We have gamification in there. We try to create a competitive environment, and student quiz assigns points. How many points for the different activities is up to your decision. These are just default values here. And for example, if you create a question as a student, you are awarded with 10 points. Then if the question becomes approved by the teacher, that is some quality control, then you get an additional 5 points for the question. And now the community can rate your question. It's just a star-based system between 1 to 5 stars. And for each star that you get from the community, you receive another 3 points. And then this is a question creation award. But you also get points by your answering competence. For example, 2 points for each correct answer. And there's also penalty, -1 point for incorrect answers. That is one thing you can do. Then here you can run it in an anonymous mode by clicking this decision point here. Maybe you want to run it in an open fashion where names are displayed to students. It's up to you. We recommend anonymous mode. And then you can also restrict the question types allowed. All the question types within Moodle work. You can also use plug-in question types, for example, the one from Marcus Green, the gap fill question type, or K-prime, if you're familiar with those question types. You can all include them there, but you can select which of the types are usable for your students. Okay, now let's see the main screen of Student Quiz, which looks like this. It's quite a packed screen. Here on top, this button is if you create a new question, if a student wants to create a new question to be shared. Then we have a mighty filter I show you later on, because that list of questions can become very, very long. And then you need to filter question according to your needs. So here is the filter area, And then you can start the quiz with the questions that you have selected. And this is a screenshot from the student point of view. It runs anonymous, and you see all the question authors, the names are not displayed, but the questions from this particular student, and he or she has the right now to edit, to delete his or her own question, but of course not the ones from other students. You can only rate and comment the question of other students. We will go into more depth into the screen, in the screen areas here. Okay, the filter. I don't want to spend much time on the filter. You can filter by so many criteria, and of course also cross-filter is allowed, because you can easily get thousands of questions, and then you need the filter in order to navigate through the quiz. When you run a quiz, that is just like you run any Moodle quiz. There is not much new. What is new is the ability to rate your questions. So when you answer the question for the first time, student quizzes ask you, and what do you think about this question? Assign 1 to 5 stars. And we actually enforce this rating because we need this kind of data in order to count the popularity of this question. And you can then comment this question. There are already some comments in here. I just type something in there, press this button, and then I leave a comment. If a question becomes commented, then a notification email is sent to the author of the question so that he or she is aware of the comment and can react accordingly. Okay, so this is the main screen. Let me focus on some particular areas. Like this My Progress, I enlarged it here a little bit. My Progress is some indicator on the level of the entire quiz, how I'm, the student, how I'm performing. And for example, I can see in this quiz there are 469 questions in total, and I already answered 383 questions correctly. That's why it's green. Red is the questions that I didn't answer correctly, and yellow are the questions that I haven't yet answered. So I tell my students, make it as green as possible, and if it's completely green at the end, then hopefully you're well prepared for your exam. The lower bar here, this shows how many questions I contributed to the quiz and how many of them were approved. In this case, all questions are approved by the teacher. This before, that was on the level of the quiz. Now you also get this kind of data on the level of each question, and that's a little bit tricky here. Two things can be influenced by a student. How difficult was a question for the student? That is just a comparison of number of correct answers to number of total answers. And then how did you like this question? And you have to consider the colors here. Blue, the background blue indicates the experience of the community about this question, so how difficult the question was for the community, or how the community likes the question, and the yellow bulbs and stars indicate how this particular student performed or rated this question. So you can easily compare your learning experience with the one of your peers. Now with the time, one more area, the ranking area. This is where gamification comes in, a little bit competitiveness. So for example, this student here was performing very well. You see the top 10 students, and he's right now performing on top. He gathered most of the points. Now, he already collected 845 points, and he probably doesn't understand how he got them, because it's not complicated math, but it's a lot of quantity data. And that's why we have another screen called the ranking screen, where the student can go in, this one here, and then he sees, okay, my 845 points, I received them because I was given 40 points, 4 times 10 points for questions created. All my questions were approved, so I got 4 times 5 points, 20 in total for the approval, and so on. It's well explained. And he also sees the ones that follow in his footsteps, or the ones above him. And you can scroll down, you see all the, however many students you have. There is another screen on statistics. So let's look at this particular student again. And then in the left column area, he sees his own statistical data. And on the right side, he sees the community data. So for example, he sees he submitted 4 questions. All of his 4 questions were approved. How many questions were submitted by his community, and so on. He sees that he has a rating average. His questions were rated by the community on average with 3.18 stars. How do my peers performed? Well, they received only on average 2.73 stars. I'm not too bad, so I can compare myself with the community. Okay. Now, that was the introduction a little bit into StudentQuiz, and that is a rather new Moodle plugin. We started the development 2 years ago, and this is how it was accepted by the Moodle community. We have already more than 300 schools using StudentQuiz, but I think it's quite good quantity data, but I also like to talk a little bit about the quality of how people use it. And I take this example here. Many of the 300 schools I don't even know. If one of you uses StudentQuiz, please let me know. But this one here, they came back because they had feature requests. The University of Otago in New Zealand, and they use it in a life critical area. I was quite surprised when I learned about it in the Faculty of Medicine. And these are different medical faculties there. And you see how many questions students collected in this area. And especially remarkable is their 50-year revision course. And they left it up to the students. Here you have that student quiz. Create your questions that you can share with your peers. and students, without much supervision by their teachers, collected almost 6,000 questions. Nobody would do that just for fun, so it must give them some value. And I asked back about performance data because it became a really big course. And so in peak times, there are like 120 students simultaneously hammering this question base, and they have no performance issues so far at least. And that's why they now decided to release this course to all their 20,000 students in Otago. And another even bigger one is the Open University UK that I'm talking to, and they formally accepted StudentQuiz now for their piloting. They have piloting for them means large numbers, already more than 1,000 students doing test runs. They have to do some modifications for their user interface, but they have plans mid-June 2019 to offer it in all their modules, and that's, I think, is quite a good reference for StudentQuiz. Now, of course, at my university, we are also using StudentQuiz, and some insight into our numbers. This was a pilot course that I had with only 80 students, and I asked each student to create 4 questions at least. So 80 times 4 should be 320. At the end of the semester, I received 540 questions, which surprised me. I was quite happy with it. But what really shocked me was when I looked at the Moodle activity statistics. Maybe you're familiar with the screen here. And then I see all my other activities. For example, this is German. These are the information regarding the exam. And imagine only 75 students from my 80 actually looked at it. So there were 5 students without any idea about the exam who went to the exam. But look what happened to StudentQuiz. I got almost 15,000 views on StudentQuiz. So 15,000 times that somebody answered a question. So I'm by far the hottest activity in our university now. And this is quite remarkable. That is a student who surprised me a lot due to personal reason. This student couldn't participate in the class for more than half of the semester. So his start was not very good. But then he really surprised me in his StudentQuiz performance. And I asked back, what are you doing in StudentQuiz? And he told me, well, I'm not asking my peers for their summaries. Instead, I use StudentQuiz as a summary because it is quite interactive, and when I ran through the question for the first time, I could answer already like 50% of the questions, and then I concentrated only on the questions that I haven't been able to answer, and the filter became smaller, 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 until at the end it was just like that hardcore set that he still had to work on. So he used it in a kind of flashcard fashion that usually you learn languages with, and I was quite surprised that you can use StudentQuiz in this way. Now, we put all the resources together. Of course, it's all on the Moodle plugin directory, the official distribution channel of Moodle. But we try to make it even a little bit more complete. There is a site, maybe you want to note this down, studentquiz.hsr.ch, where we have introduction video. I cannot give you a live demo due to the time here, but there is this video available, 50 minutes, which runs you live through the course. There is a sandbox. You don't have to install it on your own server. You can just play around on that sandbox before you decide to use this plugin. And it is available in quite many languages already, inclusive Castellano and Catalan. There's also point of contact. Okay, so in summary, I'm good in time, so I can still enjoy this slide here. Some points that I want to comment. I have to look at the English version here. Moodle content is much teacher-driven. That's the claim that we have now, that we can create something more student-driven, where students can contribute, and they're getting also feedback, right? They get feedback from their peers. I should mention that rating is a way of other peers to judge the quality of a question. But that's not the only one. As a teacher, you have the ability to approve a question. You might not completely agree with the question. The way that I do it is, if the question is correct, I give my approval. So even a question that I don't like too much, maybe too trivial or so, I would give my approval, and then I leave it up to the crowd to decide on the quality by themselves. Students learn more by creating questions rather than just commenting them. And that's, in terms of quantity, there's a phenomenon. Even if a particular student contributes a few questions only, that's where you take advantage of large student cohorts. A larger cohort can easily create a very extensive question pool. You easily get hundreds of questions. And even though that StudentQuiz has a crowd focus, the personal learning assistance is assisting each student so they can compare themselves with their peers. And we have ways to handle this huge amount of questions, especially the filter. That's where we put really focus on. And you can reuse the questions in your Moodle quizzes. And the ranking table creates a competitive environment where we have a little bit gamification, and that's why StudentQuiz is fun to play, and I hope that you will like it. We on time? All right. So I hope for questions. May I ask Beck, who is already in Spain using StudentQuiz? That's exactly the reason why I bought a plane ticket. Okay.
Hi, Frank. How are you? 3 short questions. Are the questions created by the students saved to a specific category in the folder of the quiz bank?
Sorry, I did not really get that question.
So the questions that are, they enter into the question bank, right?
Yes.
In a specific category, like you have, to separate them from other questions.
Yes.
Does the teacher have the ability to vet the questions before they are presented to the other students to prevent, for example, cheating or reusing questions, for example, that appear in finals that somehow the student got hold on to? And so does the teacher can, vet and forbid the question?
Yeah, I got it, yeah.
And the third one was whether it appears in the gradebook, like you can grade afterwards the quiz and put it in the gradebook.
Okay, so number one, the categories. StudentQuiz creates its own category. All the questions are written into its own category, and a teacher, the maintenance of the data, of the questions, a teacher always has the right to edit student questions. The teacher, even in anonymous mode, he sees or she sees the names of the student, and then a teacher can move questions into other categories. So you can create your own categories, for example, to be discussed or for later, and then you just move it in there, and it's for your later usage. For example, if I have particular inspiring questions, good questions, that's how I save them. Then the second one was about when questions become submitted, how they become published, right? We discussed it for quite a long time, and so in the moment that a student submits a question, the question is public for all the peers. The reason why we did it is maybe we have a teacher who is not too active or fall asleep or didn't understand StudentQuiz, so a teacher could block the entire quiz. So we thought it's better to release the question right away, and then students will go back to the question, hey teacher, where's my approval? Wake up. And yeah, so that's why we did it. And question number 3 was, so? Yes, no, it's on our list to do. That was due to some historical developments that we had. We cut links to the gradebook, but now we can quite easily establish it again, and that's on our list of next features. Right now we are in version 3, and gradebook will come in version 4. And not just gradebooks, there's also activity completion, where we have cut links due to some historical reasons, and we will also establish that link to activity completion.
No, doesn't work? Oh, yeah, now yes. Well, traditional quizzes, once the student has taken them and they are graded, the teacher can't really change them anymore. Is that, if I think that's right, if I'm not mistaken? In your case, this is possible. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
Or at least as long as it isn't in the gradebook.
Even if a question is already answered by a student, and with larger numbers of students, you just cannot control it. Mm-hmm. You can see how many answers a particular question received. But the question is always live, and the question, that's actually the idea with commenting, that it becomes changed and improved on the long run. So it's a little bit a problem maybe, because if you answer the question already, the question might develop into something new over time, and you might want to review this question later on.
And the whole quiz as well. Continuously new questions are added to the quiz by students, and one can do them quite often.
We don't keep track of a quiz. We don't actually have a quiz in the sense of the Moodle quiz. In a Moodle quiz, a teacher goes and from the question bank, he selects particular questions and configures his quiz, right? In StudentQuiz it's different. You have the question bank created by students. Teacher, of course, can also create question. And then every time you use a filter, that's when you create a new quiz. So we don't keep track of quizzes. As soon as you played your quiz, StudentQuiz will forget about it, but keeps track of your performance on particular questions.
Okay, thank you.
Hi. How do you manage duplicates? Many students are creating very similar or identical questions.
Yes, StudentQuiz doesn't really mean that you are relieved of any question work and you just leave it up to your students. I'm actually getting that quite often, duplicates, yes. And for example, now we come to organizational questions. How do we work with StudentQuiz? And I established a set of rules after my first experiences with it. So for example, when I used it for the first time, I gave it deadline at the end of the semester. That's when you have to turn in your question. And then I didn't receive questions for weeks. And short before the end of the semester, I was almost killed by the quantity of questions that came in. So now, for example, I say during the course of the semester we have different deadlines, and you have to get to create a question for this particular topic and another question for another topic. So in order to distribute it a little bit better. And now, that didn't answer your question. Duplicates, I just try to be very awake. Whenever new questions come, I personally had the policy, I try to approve them within 24 hours. So I check on new questions, and then usually I memorize if there was another question of this kind. And it's then up to me, whether I can still accept it. Maybe it's some new aspects in there, in a multiple choice, maybe new answering options, or I have to send a comment back, not approved, and then usually I comment something why I didn't approve this question. Yes, you have to be a little behind, otherwise there's no detection. StudentQuiz wouldn't realize that a question is a duplicate.
I have two questions. The first is I can do my question in Spanish. Yes, okay.
Yes, you can.
Vale, me parece muy interesante, muchísimas gracias por haber sacado esto, pero mi pregunta es sobre las respuestas. Es decir, si es una pregunta abierta, imagino que el alumno pone la respuesta que será correcta. ¿Habría alguna forma de que el resto de alumnos puedan ver las respuestas de los compañeros y comentarlas para hacer el aprendizaje colaborativo?
Yeah, that's actually quite a problem with the essay question type. I wouldn't recommend the essay question type to be used in StudentQuiz. StudentQuiz is more something that you want to flip through in order to repeat certain knowledge that you might already have, and you are just challenged now with a question of your peers. I don't think students want to use it typing back essay things. You could solve it by providing a sample answer in the essay question. Because there's nobody behind who wants to read all the essays written, right? But maybe I provide some text, 10 sentences, and tell my students, okay, I don't care about your answer, but if you would have given that answer, I would have been happy. Yeah, but you had another question, right? Did I answer?
The first question is, I can't speak in Spanish.
Ah, okay. Well, maybe another Spanish question to challenge me? All right. Well, thank you very much, yeah?